Decades of housing discrimination have helped create an enormous wealth gap between white and black families.
The enduring legacy of redlining, the legal government-sponsored effort to deny mortgages and home ownership opportunities to African Americans and other minorities, continues to undermine their quality of life. This violation of basic civil rights continues to negatively impact educational attainment, health outcomes, wealth accumulation, self-esteem, mortality rates, and civic engagement. Homeownership has proved to be both the doorway and gatekeeper to success and well-being in America. It is at the core of today's racial wealth gap.
There's a very powerful myth in this country, and that is that residential segregation in this country is something we call de facto segregation. Something that happened by accident. Every textbook that's used in American high schools and middle schools today lies about this history. It talks about how northern cities were de facto segregated without government involvement. They talk about how the Federal Housing Administration did a wonderful job of creating single-family homes in the suburbs for working-class families, without mentioning that the working-class families that created these homes for could only be white.
This began a history of excluding people of color from government housing programs. Intended to lower the cost of mortgages and increase home ownership. Segregated neighborhoods by race using a code system. Outlined minority neighborhoods using the color red. Intended to expand the secondary mortgage market by securitizing mortgage loans. Community boards often denied minority veterans mortgages. Many minority vets could not be buried in the same cemetery as whites. It wasn't until 1970 that lending to communities of color began to increase.
The way this manifested itself was through the drawing of maps. Different neighborhoods were underwritten as being riskier or safer, and the principal component that determined riskiness or safety from a lending standpoint was ethnic and racial composition.
It was at that point that the real estate developers began to drop strings around areas. The local banker could choose who would get mortgages where, so that we could not have gotten a loan out in the suburbs because those were whites only. The concept of a middle-class black only exists in the mind of a middle-class black. Everywhere else in the suburbs, you are that nigger family on the corner of Warren Road and Boulevard Way.
Well, the truth is that we've had in this country generations of affirmative action for whites. And the sad truth of it is that whites don't know that that's happened, or they refuse to accept it, or don't understand the history. And what that leads to is this false kind of narrative that I did it myself. You know, this Horatio Alger individual responsibility narrative.